and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today, we're going to talk about Maria of Brabant. Maria of Brabant was born the 13th of May, 1254, meaning she shares a birthday with B. Arthur and Robert Pattinson. We have to not confuse her with Marie, Duchess of Brabant. She was Marie's great-grandfather's second wife, because everyone's kind of related. And if that's the Marie you are looking for, you are in the wrong spot. Our Marie's father was Henri, Duke of Brabant, as had been his father and his grandfather before him, and his son, grandson, and great-grandson after him. They were a respectable French noble family. Her mother, Adelaide of Burgundy, came from an even older family of the Dukes of Burgundy. So she grew up financially comfortable as the daughter of two old, powerful families. Marie's father died just before her 7th birthday. We don't know exactly of what, but when an otherwise healthy 31-year-old man dies, with some but not much warning, dysentery is always a good guess. He did have some notice because he made his will 2 days before his death. In his will, he declared that after his death, any Jews in Brabant that did not cease the Catholic crime of usury be expelled from Brabant. Usury was the act of loaning money in exchange for interest. You may call it banking. According to the Catholic Church, it was a sin and thus a crime. But to all the Jews, it wasn't a sin. They weren't Catholic. It was just business. After his death, his wife took over as regent for her 10-year-old son, but the mandate against the Jews was thankfully never enforced. During the rest of her childhood, the King of France was married and widowed. Marie's mother was the regent for her eldest brother, Henri. But he was declared infirm in the mind and the body. He was physically and mentally disabled. And it was decided that he was unable to fulfill his role as duke. He was replaced by his next younger brother when he was 16. At the age of 15, Marie's other brother became the new Duke of Brabant. Roughly 5 years later, Marie's mother died of unknown causes at about the age of 40. By this point, Marie was about 18 years old. Her brother, 20-year-old Duke John, would have been in charge of arranging her marriage and paying her dowry. Duke John was a model feudal lord. He was charming and talented and popular. This probably caught the attention of the King of France, who noticed John's younger sister. King Philip the Bold of France needed a new wife. His first wife, Isabella of Aragon, had died tragically from falling off a horse while on crusade. King Philip was heartbroken, but despite having 3 surviving sons, he decided to remarry. On the 21st of August, 1274, 20-year-old Marie married 29-year-old King Philip the Bold of France. But spoiler alert, he doesn't strike me as so bold. She became the lady stepmother of 10-year-old Dauphin Louis, 6-year-old Prince Philip, and 4-year-old Prince Charles. 2 years into her marriage, Queen Marie was expecting when tragedy struck. The king's 12-year-old heir, Dauphin Louis, died. It was unclear how, but the queen had her baby and named him Louis after his older brother. It was around this time that the king's chancellor, Pierre de la Brosse, accused the 22-year-old queen of poisoning her eldest stepson. Did she? I don't think so. She was young and new at court and pregnant. Her baby wasn't going to be king. She would have had to poison all 3 of the king's sons. It doesn't strike true to me. But La Brosse was adamant. The queen had murdered her stepson, Crown Prince Louis. By the following year, the consensus had shifted, and a large part of the population suspected that La Brosse had poisoned the prince in order to frame the queen. Letters allegedly written by La Brosse were presented to the king, and that was enough to have him arrested, tried, and executed. Case solved. Kind of. There was still some doubt in this he said, she said. 2 years later, the queen was expecting again. She gave birth to Princess Blanche in 1278, and the very next year another princess joined the family, Princess Margaret. In 1285, Queen Marie encouraged her husband, King Philip the Bold, to go to war with the Kingdom of Aragon to their south. Aragon was on the verge of going bankrupt, so they were an easy target. If you remember, King Philip's first wife was Isabella of Aragon. Her brother was the King of Aragon, so his wife was encouraging him to go to war with his late wife's brother, Bold Philip. Maybe that's where he got the name. France was winning. Aragon was going down. But then, dysentery. It ran through the French army. Don't poo where you drink, guys. The French king came down with dysentery and died at just the age of 40. His son, Prince Philip, became the new king of France. The king is dead. Long live the king. 17-year-old King Philip IV of France, Philip the Fair. For my longtime listeners, we've talked about him before. King Philip the Fair was the father of Isabella of France, the topic for my very first episode. We're about to enter season 1 time, guys. The new king's uncle had his army attack the French, and with all of the dysentery going around, he found it quite easy. Dysentery saved the kingdom of Aragon from being conquered by the French. Clean water is your friend. The King of Aragon died just 1 month later of unknown causes at the age of 45 or 46. The king is dead. Long live the king. The new king was his eldest son, King Alfonso III, the cousin of the new French king. So the cousins were like, look, that was our dad's beef. Was it all copacetic? No. But they were both new kings and not here for their father's war. Philip the Fair was way more into battling the English. The King of England was King Edward I, Hammer of the Scots. A marriage arrangement was made for hopeful peace between King Edward's son, Edward, Prince of Wales, and King Philip's sister, Blanche, Maria's daughter. But things went down, and King Edward's wife died, and he needed a new wife, so the suggestion was put forward that Maria's daughter marry King Edward instead. He was about 40 years older than her, but this wasn't up to Maria. It was up to her stepson, the King of France. And if we believe the poisoning rumors, it was all her fault. Philip was king in the first place. He had been spared until his older brother had died. King Edward sent his brother to France to work out his new marriage proposal. But when he arrived in France, he found his brother's betrothed already betrothed to someone else. King Edward threatened war, give me your women or I'll fight you, and not just the women, because Blanche, the half-sister of the King of France, was only 13 years old. And honestly, it was much ado about nothing, because none of those marriages ever materialized. What did materialize was the betrothal of Maria's youngest daughter, Princess Margaret, at the age of 12, to the 52-year-old Prince of England. Ew. But not yet. They would not be married for another 8 years. In 1295, Maria's stepson, Philip the Fair, had his 4th child and only daughter, Isabella of France, of Season 1, Episode 1 fame. And with that, we've entered Season 1. In 1299, Maria's youngest daughter, Margaret, 20, now married to the King of England, King Edward I, Hammer of the Scots, who was 60, she had 2 sons and a short-lived daughter with the king. One of her sons was Edmund of Woodstock. You probably don't remember him, but he's already on our spiderweb. He was the father of Joan, the Fair Maid of Kent, from my 3rd episode, because everyone's kind of related. This episode on Maria of Brabant, Queen of France, is the great-grandmother of Joan, the Fair Maid of Kent. And if I'm honest, it took this episode for me to figure that connection out. In 1300, at about the age of 22, Maria's daughter Blanche was married to the Duke of Austria, the son of the King of Germany, who was, at the time, just 19. She died 5 years later, possibly from complications of a miscarriage. So in 1305, Maria was about 51. Her stepson was the King of France, King Philip IV, or Philip the Fair, because he was just so pretty. He had 3 sons and a daughter, so Maria's sons were likely never going to be kings of France. Her son Louis was 29 and a count. He was a father of 2, with more on the way. Her daughter, Blanche, had died, likely from complications of a miscarriage. Her daughter Margaret was the Queen of England, married to the elderly Hammer of the Scots. Remember the elderly king in Braveheart? This elderly king is that guy. 2 years later, Maria's elderly son-in-law was still looking for a wife for his underwhelming son Edward, Prince of Wales. An arrangement was made to marry Maria's step-granddaughter Isabella of France to the king's son, Prince Edward. That same year, the elderly king of England, Maria's son-in-law, died at the age of 68. Maria's daughter, Queen Margaret, was now the 28-year-old Dowager Queen of England. If you've been around for a while, you may know that being a wealthy young widow is kind of the goal for the time. The king's 23-year-old son, Prince Edward, was the new king. The king is dead. Long live the king. 23-year-old King Edward II was the new king, and unlike his father, he wasn't so great at war. He didn't have a snappy Hammer of the Scots nickname. But he still needed a wife, so he went to France to marry 13-year-old Princess Isabella of France. And for that story, go check out her episode. She grows up and deposes her lame husband and replaces him on the throne with her son. She also has a boyfriend that helped her named Roger Mortimer. It's a whole vibe. In 1314, Maria's stepson, King Philip IV, died, leaving his son to succeed him, and then his other son, and then his other son, and then succession crisis. The Capetians had faltered on male heirs, and the 100 Years' War had started. In 1318, Maria's last surviving daughter, the Dowager Queen of England, died at the age of 38 or 39, having never remarried and just having lived her best wealthy widow life. The following year, in 1319, Maria's last surviving child, Count Louis, died at the age of 43. And just 3 years after the death of her last child, Maria also died at the age of 67. She died at a monastery where she had been living in seclusion for the previous 6 years, mourning her children and spending her time with God. And that is where I'll leave it for now. What did you think of Maria of Brabant? Did she poison her stepson? If you listen on Spotify, I'm going to leave a poll. Feel free to jump into the conversation. The question is, did she poison her 12-year-old stepson? She lived a long life full of court intrigue. It must be where her great-granddaughter, Joan the Fair Maid of Kent, got it from. She also had a very intriguing life. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com or on Facebook or Instagram at Long Live the Queen Podcast. Long live to all the queens out there, and until next time, bye.
You'll be remembered.
Thanks for listening.